Hi there, this is Anita, Artworks by Anita, and today I wanted to share with you a little bit about paper, watercolor paper, and stretching it. So first of all, I'll kind of share with you what I do and how I do things. Every artist kind of does things a little differently, but I'd be glad to share with you what I do and works best for me. First of all, I use Arches, 140-pound paper, and this is cold press, and I really like that paper. It's high quality paper. It's 100% cotton, neutral pH. I like the surface of the cold press, and I've been using it for years. And I buy it a full size 22 by 30. And it's just a great quality paper. 140 pound means that 500 sheets weighs 140 pounds. The higher the number, the thicker and the heavier the paper is. Here is a sheet of 300 pound Arches, and you can see it's much like a board. So this paper really doesn't need to be stretched or adhered in some way to a board because it is very sturdy and it really doesn't wrinkle up that much. Also, I have been using the Fabriano Eristic, and this is a block. And a block is kind of nice because it is gummed all the way around, kind of like a tablet is. It's gummed all the way around. I can paint on this when it's completely dry. Then I can take it off, the top sheet off, and then the next layer is ready to go. There are 20 sheets in this block. It's 140 pound, 100% cotton. When you're looking at the quality, it's internally and externally sized, very absorbent, suitable for lifting, scraping, and other techniques, and that works great for me. And it has a different white or the extra white, and it's ideal for watercolor, gouache, acrylic, ink, charcoal, and drawing. And it's just a good quality paper as well, which I like to use. Now, years ago, when we went to stretch our paper, we used masonite boards, taped them to masonite boards, or plywood boards, just like this. And I could either tape with this or staple. And that's what we used. These boards were really pretty heavy, but that's what we used several years ago. Now, I use what is called gator board, and this is kind of a paper coating, but it has the styrofoam in between. Very, very lightweight, very rigid, doesn't warp, and I've been using these for probably about 15 years, maybe 12 years. Anyway, this is what I use now. Very lightweight, and I have them small ones for smaller pieces. This will handle a half sheet, and I have other ones that will handle a full sheet. So I would like to talk a little bit about actually stretching watercolor paper. And what you're doing is laying it down onto a board so that you can work with it easier because you're using water. Now, if you have a tendency to use more pigment than water, I know of a friend that doesn't stretch hers or adhere hers to a board at all because she uses more pigment, less water. But I use more water, and so it's important that my paper be stretched. Now, if you're going to use tape, I know if you do quick drawings or quick paintings, if you use something like, a thin masking tape, fine. But I really like to use this tape. It's a white masking tape, and I like this width. I put half of it on the paper and half of it off of the paper. and it's a great, great tape, and it comes off very easily, it comes off very cleanly, and it doesn't leave any residue on the paper. I really like it. In fact, if I would pull this off, I could almost use it again. But that works very well. So I do suggest if you're taping, have enough. What I don't like is that when you wet this, it will buckle because it's stretching the paper and it has nowhere to go if all four sides are taped. And so you run into that over and over again. So I don't do taping very often. And also I use a lot of water. And a lot of times I would come back when I used other tapes and the tape would be pulling apart from the paper. So I don't really like that. What I like to do is I like to staple. And I'll show you how I do that. I have water and a mop brush. And so I can wet the paper, and I really do want to get it thoroughly wet, and basically both sides. So what I'll do is I will wet one side. I used this before, so it's a scrap piece of watercolor paper, so there is some color there. And I like to do both sides, and I'm not pressing very hard. I'm not rubbing the paper. I really don't want to get rid of a lot of that sizing. I used to take my paper and put it in the bathtub to soak for a little while, not too long, but for a little while. But I found that sometimes you have residue from soaps or shampoos, and definitely you don't want that on your paper. I can use a mop brush, I can use a sprayer, to spray it down, get it wet. At times I'll even take a sponge and but I don't want to rub the surface, disturb the surface very much. So once I get that really wet, kind of want the inside wet a little bit. Just like wallpaper, you know that when you get that wet, the wallpaper has a tendency to stretch. Same thing with this. Okay, now that I have that very wet, and I've taken my time to make sure that it is good and wet, I'm going to take my stapler and I'm going to staple it to the board. So I'm very methodical about it. I really do start on an edge, and I'm not pressing down hard. I'm kind of keeping it up so that I can get the staples out rather easily without scratching the paper. Yes, this is an old stapler. And I'm methodical in that I'm just lightly coming across, just making sure that it's laying flat. From the center, I'm going to come back this way, make sure. If a larger sheet of paper, you'll have sometimes it ripple up on you. And I do not want to pull hard because then you're stretching the paper, just like wallpaper, if you've ever done that before. Then when it goes to dry, it shrinks back. That'll happen here too. And then it'll pull away from these staples. So, be very gentle when you're doing this. Now I'm going to do the corners. This stapler is so old. I've had this ever since I was in college, which was years ago. You can see that I'm just working across from each staple. You can see I had a lot of water there. And then the spaces that are left, I like to go kind of in the middle and work out. Here, this is just a small paper. Now, I like to just kind of let it dry on its own, but if I want to work right away, I'll take a hair dryer and dry it. And every time that I work, it'll dry perfectly flat, tight as a drum. And that's why I like staples. Again, be careful not to stretch this out with your hands, because when it does dry, it's going to pull them right, it'll pull the paper right out of the staples. And sometimes, though, I like to do what's called an underpainting. I like to put color in to kind of set a tone for my watercolor paintings. So most of the time, I will, when it's in this stage, nice and wet and soupy, I will lay in color that's going to help with the theme of whatever I'm painting. So, but each and every time that it dries, then I use lots of layers, lots of waters. With the stapling method, it dries nice and flat. Here's one that I did stretch, and then I just laid in some color, and you can just see it dries nice and flat. It's, even though I had the staples close to the edge, it didn't pull away or anything like that. So that's why I like the stapling method.